All right, guys, I'm going to show you the expectations for your lab reports. For this bubblegum lab, loaded a template to Google Classroom. There should be a copy there for each of you. So if you just go to Google Classroom and find the assignment, bubblegum lab report. The data collection form was the Google form that just the person doing the chewing was to fill out, so we can look at that data. So the lab report, you will find your copy. So open your copy and edit that one. You also want your bubblegum data table open that we did together in class. So make sure that your data table has your equation for a line and your line itself, as well as all of the points that you have in your data table. So I will do a separate video if you find that you don't have this graph and data table complete. All right, let's start at the top. If you do not have a header, you have to double click up here to be able to edit it. If you do not see lab title and student name in brackets, you have to go up to Insert, go down to Header Footers, and click on Header. That will allow this header to pop open for you. So in order to edit, again, just double click in the header. The lab title, make sure you use what is on the lab paper I usually give you. This lab did not have a handout, so we're just going to call it the Bubblegum Lab. Make sure you put your name. Please capitalize the first letter of your name. Same thing down here. Do not move any of the text. Don't change the font. Don't change the size. It is the way it should be for this type of format. So your lab title again, Bubblegum Lab. That header will appear at the top of every page as well as the page number. Your name and then your group members' names. In between your group members' names, make sure you put a comma and a space and capitalize them, proper punctuation. When you're writing your class, please be specific, like period 6 chemistry. Even for earth science with 2 periods, please tell me what period you are. This, I'm not so specific, but it should be one of the dates that you actually worked on your report. All right, anywhere in this template where you see these brackets, that tells you that you need to put in some sort of information. This lab in specific is on the scientific method, so make sure that in your introduction you spell out what these steps are. Remember, the acronym for scientific method is OHDAC. So O and H of that all fall in the introduction section. So for this lab, an example would be your observation. Tell me something that you observed that caused you to pick the gum that you did. So like you picked Polar Ice because you're curious how long the flavor lasts. Something along those lines. And then hypothesize. If you didn't at the time, just make sure that you do think about what you thought going into this lab. Did you think that your gum would have flavor that lasted a long time? I'm going to assume that most of you picked ones that you think do. I didn't see any Bubblicious or any of those really fruity gums being chosen. All right, so both the observation and the hypothesis should be in the introduction. Now, the materials and the procedure can be bulleted or numbered. They do not have to be complete sentences, but your materials are what you actually use for this lab. So for this one, you used obviously your bubble gum. Please be specific, brand and flavor. And then you used a scale. If you want to be specific there, remember it was a scale that was able to go to the hundredths of a gram. And you used an aluminum foil boat. You probably used your Chromebook. If there is anything else that you used for a lab, make sure you include it in the material section. And then under the procedure, just outline what you did. The steps can be generalized, but if you were trying to tell someone what you did in this lab that didn't know, they should be able to follow it with your procedure. Again, numbered or bulleted is fine. So for the material and the procedure, that's where the majority of the E and the OHDAC goes. Okay, that's the experiment that you are outlining. Now OHDAC, we've got DAC left. Now guys, these steps follow for every lab report we write. This is how you do science. So when you're writing a lab report and you're trying to think of what to put in it, no matter which lab we're doing, this is what you're going to think back to. So for the data tables, this is all the data collection that you've done. So obviously that is the D, the data. That goes in your data tables. So data tables would be the graphs, drawings, calculations. So let's say that it's a lab where you have to physically write out calculations. If your handwriting is incredibly messy, I encourage you to try rewrite them as neat as possible. That is the only exception where I allow pictures or screenshots, as if it's actually your physical handwriting. Sometimes the symbols and such that we use are a little tricky to get in here. But if you can, it's always better to have it typed out. So for this lab, I'm going to clear all this stuff here. In this lab, we had specific data tables, and I've seen some kids struggling with that. And throughout the year, it is probably one of the hardest things for kids to understand format. So under the data table section, you are going to have a title for each of them. For instance, I'm going to say data table 1, use Roman numeral 1, which is just capital I here is fine. And then you go over to your data table spreadsheet, and you are going to, remember when you want to highlight something, you want the cursor that you traditionally see to click and hold, left click and hold to highlight. So highlight everywhere you want by left clicking when it is a little arrow, drag down. Control C, that's copy. Go back to your lab. Control V. This link means that if you link it, when you update your spreadsheet, it will update in your lab. It is handy for, let's say you realize you get to the end and you realize that your data is different than your group members, then maybe you had a typo in your data table. You could update it and it will update in your document without you having to change it in all the places. In the future, your group will have the same data table, and you just copy and paste out of your group's data table into your own lab report. So I'm going to link, because I want to show you how that update works. All right, so I've got my data table. Make sure that I can read it. It should not be such small font that it is unable to be read. All right, so I've got my header here. So I will have a title saying this is just my basic data table 1. If I had more than one data table, like here, data table 2. Because I actually copied and pasted that together, it's coming together. I'm actually going to change that format. Let's actually... One thing kids struggle with as well is deleting a table. If you highlight it and then right click and go delete table, that's probably your best bet. So I'm going to go back and copy and paste it over individually so I can show you what happens if you have 2 data tables. So let's say I've got that one. Control V, I'm going to link it. Okay, I'm going to give one space, data table 2 is capital I for Roman numeral 2. I'm going to do that again, highlight, Control C, Control V, and I'm going to remove that space just so my header is right above my data table. But notice I have a header specifying which data table and what sequence, and the table itself has a title, and each column has a title with the unit. This one is fine because it follows with this one, the title and unit. All right, next we want to go graph 1, and we got this guy we want to copy over. I found if you put it off to its own sheet, it doesn't copy over to Google Docs real nicely. You'll have to kind of play with the size if you did that. So just kind of drag the corners until it's sized in your Google Doc to fit. But same thing, we just click on it, Control C, Control V. Again, I can link it. So this is how I want it to look, guys. I want it to be left justified so it touches this margin. Just like in English class when you're writing a paper, you have the MLA or APA formatting option. Lab reports have the same. So I have the formatting all set up for you. You just have to not change it. So everything is left justified in this format. And everything has a bold header. If your graph is illegible, that will be a point deduction. I need to be able to read your numbers and your data at a quick glance. What I will be looking for is, do you have the equation for your line? Do you have all points that are on this data table marked? You don't have to have this one. This is your control. And do you have your X and Y axis labeled with your dimension and your unit? And do you have a title to your graph? So that's how we put data tables and graphs in. Now, when we get down here, actually, a lot of people ask this. I do think it makes more sense to have it said that didn't fall in the right spot. Obviously, I haven't finished this, so I would wait to do it till you're the very end, but you want your header right above your actual table. So if page-wise it doesn't fall, then just tab it down till it's where you need it. But wait till you're done with everything, because obviously I would have had words up here that could have pushed it down more. All right, observations. So we said OHIDAC, right? We got to data, which was all this. Now the analysis portion would be the observation and the conclusion, depending on when you did it. So observations are things that you were observing or doing during the lab. So for instance, I saw a lot of you realizing that your gum was actually losing mass every 2 minutes, which is exactly what we were hoping for, but we were looking for that supporting evidence. So you could mention that you noticed your data was supporting evidence for the conclusion that you hope to be drawing here. And then when you talk about it in your conclusion, which is obviously the analysis and the conclusion aspect, you're going to talk about anything you did post-lab. So for this lab, we had a very long post-lab analysis where we graphed it. Okay, so this all falls under that conclusion, the post-lab analysis, and that line. Remember your equation for your line, because y equals mx plus b. We spent an entire day talking about what each of these elements meant in reference to this, because that was the entire point of this lab. Was, remember, your hypothesis and your observation was you wondered how much flavor loss would happen. We noticed that it lost this much flavor every second. So for mine, I lost, that's why it's a negative, it was a loss of mass. If we take this number and we put it into standard notation, so again, this is scientific notation, which I will write out. When a computer writes scientific notation, it uses an E instead of the times 10 to the exponent that we are used to seeing. So this is negative 5.23 E, so that's the times 10 to the exponent of, and it's a negative 4 there. So what that means is my decimal was moved over 4 places, so I have to move it back to see standard. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you have to put zeros in for placeholders. 1, 2, 3. Under each of those dips, put a 0 in to hold the place, because your decimal needs to be that far away from your numbers. So what that means is this gum that I'm saying Mason was chewing, I don't remember whose data I pulled, lost 0.00523 grams per second. And we are assuming that mass that was being lost was all flavor. So every 1 second, that is how much was being lost. Remember when we did this trend line and found that equation, that is averaging all of our data, which is a tool we will use frequently. All right, so that number that I just mentioned needs to be in your conclusion. I will be looking for that number and what it means in reference to your hypothesis. Each lab, my primary grading objective is to look for your supporting evidence end your final conclusion with data. You cannot just say, this was a fun lab, I enjoyed it, I was surprised my gum lost mass. The point of your lab report is to report out your findings on how you did your science. All right, I think that is it for now. With how I posted this lab report in Classroom, because there's already a template there, when you're finished, you just click turn in. You won't be able to edit it once you click turn in. Just make sure you have it turned in before the due date, which I am actually going to change to the 6th. All right, I will shortly do a video for how to do the spreadsheet calculations if anybody's